In order to begin, I want us to read these words about the life Jesus brings us into. So if you can open your Bible or device to John 10, 9 to 10, just two wee little verses. If you're joining us for the first time, I want to say welcome. We are in the middle of a series called Sound Mind. It says so right there. Sound Mind. The whole premise of this series is that we want to be a people that follow Jesus in a mental, emotional, and physical healthy way. You could say like the banner over the whole collection of talks that we're doing is health. We just want to become healthy. We believe that in a world that is riddled by anxiety and depression and a mental health crisis, that as followers of Jesus, we can actually be an apologetic to the reign of God if we become healthy. And so we really want just this to serve you in helping you become a healthy individual, mind, body, soul, and spirit, sound mind. So let's read the words of Jesus ahead of our conversation tonight. John 10, verses 9 to 10, he says this, I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come so that they would have life and have it abundantly. Can you say, have it abundantly? Now say life. I just broke my number one rule. I hate when preachers do that, and I did it. I'm sorry. It just felt so good. Jesus has a vision for your life, and it's super simple. I had a conversation with a friend recently. He's just like, man, I don't know about this Christianity stuff. Jesus kind of weirds me out. Like, what does he want from me? And I was like, Jesus wants stuff, from you for sure, love and fidelity and loyalty, practicing his way. But like, let's talk about what Jesus wants for you, right? Jesus wants for you. Jesus wants something for you. He has one objective for you, and it's this: life and life abundantly. Jesus identifies why he came. He gave us his whole MO. He's not speaking cryptically. He's like, here's why I'm here, guys, to give you life abundantly. Here's the problem. Life is hard. It's a problem that pretty much all ancient wisdom talks about at length, but we have conveniently tried to wipe out of the consciousness of our minds in the West through nice aesthetics, social media, and luxury goods. The world is broken, life is hard, and it's not going to get easier. So how do we take the invitation of Jesus to life and life abundantly and actually experience that in our lives? We do this really interesting thing where when we hear Jesus speak about something, we often think he means something like totally different than what he actually means. I don't know if you've noticed this. Like when Jesus says, do not worry, a lot of us hear Jesus' words, do not worry, and we read that and we hear Jesus saying, I'm going to take away everything from your life that's going to make you worry. See what I'm saying? Do you agree? Like when we read Jesus say, like, I'm going to give you life and life abundantly, we do this thing where we think he's saying one thing that he's not. He's like, I came for you to have life and life abundantly, so it's just going to happen. It's not how it works. It's not how it's ever worked. In fact, when you study the history of Christianity, when people started to follow Jesus, things got bad pretty quick. They died fast. Like, what a paradox. Life and life abundantly. Why are homies dying? You know what I mean? What if you're Jesus' friends? You're like, bro, you said life. Peter's dead. That's not life. We say Jesus is like, do not worry. And then we think Jesus is like, don't worry. I'm going to take away everything from your life that's going to cause you worry and pain. And so often what I'm trying to get at is Jesus doesn't take away things that cause pain. He gives us something better. A way to engage with pain that actually produces redemption and possibility in the world. So he's not going to remove things from your life that cause pain. He's going to engage you in such a way where you become a transformative agent for pain. Where you take pain and you produce it into hope and love and joy when everybody else would take pain and turn it into despair. That's the miracle of life and life abundantly. So the problem we have is that life is hard. Stress, anxiety, and trauma-inducing events typically do not decrease as we get older, they increase. The person you thought you were going to marry no longer feels the connection, and you begin to seriously doubt your self-worth. You wake up one day and you go to work and your career eviscerates before your eyes because someone else took your job. The church you call family implodes, leaving you bitter and resentful towards Christian community. You wake up and you want to do something and you realize you have way less money than you thought and experience the tidal wave of anxiety that comes from financial strain. Your school requires 50 hours of work in a 20-hour time window, almost like your prof doesn't even understand that you're human. You know what I'm saying? And you break down in this existential crisis. Did I pick the wrong degree? Am I spending all this money for no reason? Life and life abundantly? See, it's easy to enjoy the vitality of fresh fidelity to Jesus during the inertia of your initial encounter with him. But it is another thing entirely to experience that same transcendent love, peace, energy, and zeal to see the kingdom of God come to earth when the world is falling around you and your mind feels like a hellscape. And listen very carefully, Tehillah, I'm not saying that all of us in here are going to encounter the problems of life and just somehow like fizzle out. Like, man, you're going to burn bright for God in your 30s and 40s, and then you're going to burn bright for God in your 20s and 30s, and then your 40s and 50s, you're just going to be like tame and lame. I don't believe that. That's not true. I think we together, if we do this thing right and we follow Jesus together, we can be more on fire for Jesus, more passionate about the continuation of his kingdom, more deeper in love with him, and participating in the move of the Spirit with more authenticity and joy and zeal at 80 than at 28. I believe that. So don't ever believe the lie that you have to follow Jesus in your religious stage for like a good 2 or 3 years. That's not true. It's a lie from the pit of darkness. But I do want to be very honest with us and say the momentum of youthful zeal is not enough to get us through the challenges and stresses of life in a broken world. The inertia of your initial discovery of Jesus and the life he has will not be enough to carry you through the traumas and the stress and the negative emotions of living in a world that is characterized by both beauty and brokenness. It won't be enough. Stress increases, disappointments happen, and unless we are equipped with the right tools, even the most zealous amongst us will wake up one day and find ourselves saying words we never thought we could say, just like my friend, is this even working? So I want to propose that often our felt frustration isn't that the cross of Christ didn't work, it's that we didn't have the tools necessary to respond well to the problems we face in life. So tonight, we're going to talk about coping mechanisms, and I want to offer up a probing question for tonight. So we can put that up. This is our guiding question for tonight. How do we cope with hardships in life in a way that leads us to continual transformation and spiritual, emotional, and mental health? How do we cope with hardships in life? Thank you, Michael. Oh, you're so encouraging. Michael's he's awesome. Michael's my coping mechanism. When I get anxious, I just call Michael. I'm like, I'm fine. How do we cope with hardships in life in a way that leads us to continual transformation in spiritual, emotional, and mental health? Let's start with a definition of what a coping mechanism actually is. So this comes from 2 sources, the National Library of Medicine and a peer-reviewed article by Dr. Aubrey Bailey. Coping mechanisms are behaviors and strategies used to help manage stress, trauma, and negative emotions. Pretty good, right? I studied for that. Now, in order to find out how this works, I want to introduce us to something called the stress response. So we should have a slide up here of a brain. There's a brain. The stress response is something we need to understand if we're going to know how to use coping mechanisms in our life. So take a look at this brain behind me. The stress response begins with what is commonly referred to as stressors, okay? So, for example, we think of stressors being negative, such as exhausting work schedule or rocky relationships or a you up text at like 3 in the morning from the person you never thought you were going to text again. However, a stressor can be anything that puts high demands on us. This includes positive events such as being married, buying a house, going to college, and receiving a promotion. It's fascinating. Braden, I hope, can back this up. I was reading, this wasn't a peer-reviewed article, so I'm going into dangerous territory, but it actually was fascinating. When people actually, they did kind of like a sample test of what was the most stressful events people went through. Unbelievably, one of the most stressful times in people's lives was being newly married. Fascinating. 6 months ago. So it's the reason my hairline's going. I'm just kidding. I'm just messing around. So when someone experiences a stressor, that is a hard life event, this little thing called the amygdala. Say amygdala. We're going to bio class. Let's do bio 30 in church. Come on. We're doing bio class. This little thing called the amygdala, which is an area of the brain that helps with emotional processing, sends us a stress signal up to the hypothalamus. I said that right. The hypothalamus, and that hypothalamus is a bit like a command center. So this distress signal fires all the way through what's called your sympathetic nervous system, and what it does is it actually overrides this thing called your prefrontal cortex and your cerebral cortex. That's your decision-making mechanism. So your ability to rationally choose things and make decisions and do math, all those sort of things. That's my excuse for being bad at math. I was just stressed a lot, When you get into a stressful scenario, all of your decision-making factors go secondary, and your body just responds in a moment. It's crazy, okay? Now this happens, these distress signals fires, and your nervous system, releases this flood of stress hormones that help us react to the perceived threats that is in front of you. If you can go to the next slide here. So this is how this works. Alarm, stress hormone, boom, body-wide changes. See what I'm saying? So, and this typically all happens in a millisecond. Now, this is really helpful if you're about to get impaled by an elephant. This is really helpful if you're on a walk. I don't know why you'd walk in a place that I'm about to describe, but if you're on a walk and a cheetah comes and tries to attack you, I'm like, what a dumb example. What walk are any of you going to be on where a cheetah comes and attacks you? This is really helpful when a bear charges you or a bus is coming at you. But let me tell you when it's not helpful. When you are trying to maintain a reasonable level of emotional, mental, and physiological stability in what is literally known as the most anxious age in human history. So it's really helpful when your life's in danger. But this can actually work against you when you are in a world that is characterized by anxiety. Because here's the interesting part. An article from Psychology Today summarizes this aptly. The problem is our body doesn't know the difference between actual danger and emotional stress. Your nervous system is not very good at distinguishing between emotional and physical threats. So this article says this: if you're super stressed over an argument with a friend, a work deadline, or a mountain of bills, your body can react just as strongly as if you're facing a true life or death situation. So now you can tell your parents when they say, "Can you pay us rent?" You'd be like, "You're putting my life at risk." Article goes on to say this: the more your emergency stress system is activated, the easier it becomes to trigger, making it harder to shut off. In other words, when something happens that causes our body to be in stress, or when something happens that brings up this flood of negative emotions or anxiety or depression or whatever it may be, your body literally has to do something to channel that energy. It has to. And if it doesn't, you will end up in a state called chronic stress, which is one of the #1 killers in North America. So the reason, if we're going to talk about coping mechanisms, the reason we need to start with the stress response to understand any of this is because if we're going to work towards coping with the problems we face in life in a godly way, we first need to understand how our bodies are wired. You agree? So we come to this conclusion: our bodies were not designed to hold high levels of stress and emotional and mental strain for a long period of time without being managed. Braden told me this yesterday, and I really appreciated it. Emotions are energy in motion. They will go somewhere. They don't just stay neutral. They have to go somewhere. So we have to choose what. So this is important for us to understand because when I don't know if you were like me, but when I heard the word coping mechanism, I immediately thought of people that went to Alpha House. And that's my bad. I repent for that. When I heard coping mechanism, I immediately thought of people that were like addicted to some of the worst drugs that humanity has ever created. But that's not true. A coping mechanism, the need for a coping mechanism is actually fundamental to how God made us. All of us have to have something that we do to cope with heartbreak and stress and anxiety. Every one of us needs that. It just depends on how you choose to cope. This leads us to identify the two categories of coping mechanisms that we know of today. One, maladaptive, and two, adaptive. Maladaptive are negative, typically reactionary ways of handling emotional instability and stress. Adaptive coping mechanisms are positive, proactive ways of handling emotional instability and stress. The difference here, maladaptive is typically reactionary in the moment. Adaptive is typically system-oriented and integrates into your lifestyle. Does that make sense to everybody? That's like super important. Basically, a maladaptive coping mechanism is something you do in the moment. It's a rash decision. It's a conscious decision, but a rash one. An adaptive coping mechanism is something you've worked hard, like a system or like a skeletal structure supporting the physical elements of your body. It's this thing that carries you, okay? And that's really important to understand. So first things first, we're going to talk about maladaptive coping mechanisms because in order to achieve our goal of finding healthy and godly ways to cope with stress, we first need to understand how stressors of life lead us to actually further captivity to the spiritual forces of darkness. These things can actually take us away from the life and life abundantly that Jesus offers. So if we can get up the characteristics of maladaptive coping mechanisms, they're focused primarily on short-term gratification, like I said. Most maladaptive coping mechanisms are things that you'll do that are called flooding of a dopaminergic response. So basically your brain gets flooded with this insane cocktail of dopamine that's totally unrealistic, okay? So it sets you up to fail because you experience this remarkable high, but then you'll crash really intensely, okay? They're not sustainable at all because they're distraction-based and addictive. So these coping mechanisms are things you're gonna do, and they're not gonna help transform stress in your life. It's just gonna briefly distract you from it in a really powerful way. So you can think about it like this. You're super, super stressed about something. Let's say you had a relational fracture. It caused like this flood of emotions in you, of like childhood wounding, all these things, lies your teachers told you. And then in a moment, you just go, oh, you know what, I'm just gonna have a drink. And then 1 turns into 2, 2 turns into 3, 3 turns into 4. Next thing you know, you can't even remember where you were. That's a maladaptive coping mechanism. It's a response that initiates this flooding of dopamine, but doesn't actually do anything to transform the energy that was coming through you. Negative coping mechanisms, I just said that. These will cause you to ignore the pain and stress, essentially providing a way out from feeling uncomfortable sensations, but they'll do nothing to help you transform them sustainably. So let's just look at some examples. These are including but not limited to drinking, using drugs, most commonly weed, shopping, anger and irritability. Shopping, I heard a couple of shopping? Oh no. I didn't know that was a maladaptive coping mechanism. I thought it was healthy. Is that where all my money went? I don't know, you know. Anger, irritability, denying and ignoring the problem, self-harm, binge eating, dark and harmful thoughts. Chair. That was... Dark and harmful thoughts towards others. Self-isolation and withdrawal from community, pornography and sexual promiscuity, and seeking affirmation and attention in unhealthy ways. So, all of these are unhealthy ways that we respond to stress and uncomfortable emotions in our life. And here's the thing. Every one of us in this room has some kind of maladaptive coping mechanism in our life. It can be as innocent as 3 hours doom scrolling on TikTok, which I would argue is not that innocent, or as harmful as a full-blown opioid addiction. Every single person in here does something in response to stress that negatively affects your overall health. Every one of us in here. Now, psychology is a spiritually and religiously neutral field, so they will use words like harmful or ineffective or destructive to describe the list above. But what psychology observes as harmful through the scientific method is what the Bible has called sinful for thousands of years. And it doesn't take a genius looking at this list behind me to see that so much of our sin, if you're being really honest and you really want to cultivate self-awareness in this moment, so much of our sin, y'all pay attention, so much of our sin is rooted in bad responses to stress. Re-enslaving us to a life that Jesus died to free us from. So much of our dysfunction and frustration we feel in our discipleship to Jesus isn't because the cross of Christ didn't work. It's not because the Holy Spirit didn't occupy your body and free you from the thralls of death, hell, and the grave. It's because you don't have tools to effectively manage this stressful situation in front of you. How many of you understand we have an adversary? We have an adversary. You can call him whatever you want, the devil, Hasatan, whatever theologically correct or incorrect words you want to use, whatever. The most important thing we have to understand is that the Bible is very clear. You and I are in a spiritual battle. And we have an adversary that is fundamentally opposed to everything good God is doing in our life. Do you guys remember that little bit Jesus' best friend Peter said about the devil? Do you guys remember that? Peter said this, "The devil prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking to devour those, seeking for a meal." He's a hungry, roaring lion. I don't know about you, but I would say most of us, we don't approach life with that level of intensity. This is Jesus' best friend, the understudy of the rabbi, and he's going, be vigilant. He's like a roaring lion. He didn't say he's like a sea otter. Like he'll get upset when you threaten him, you know? He didn't say he's like a kitten looking for some kibble. Just looking for a little snack. Let me see if I can snack here. Meow. He didn't say he's like a sheepdog that's gonna bark at you when you get mad and you keep him in your 600 square foot apartment. No, he said he's like a roaring lion. Have you ever watched a National Geographic documentary with a hungry lion scene? I would argue you haven't watched any Animal Kingdom documentary without a hungry lion scene. Can I tell you what a hungry lion isn't? Can I let you on a secret? Everybody lean in, lean in, lean in. Like actually lean in, like lean in. I want to see everybody, I want to see you leaning in, come on. My guy looked at me with defiance in his eyes. Satan, get behind. I'm just kidding. Everybody lean in. Okay, shh, all across the room, all across the room. Shh. Can I tell you what the enemy isn't? Let me say it like this. Can I tell you, I'm gonna let you on a secret. This is gonna blow your mind. Can I tell you what a roaring lion isn't? Lazy. A roaring lion is focused, precise, looking for every opportunity to exploit you, destroy you, and crush you. A roaring lion isn't roaming around going, I wonder if this is my opportunity. Maybe I should take it. He's active. We have to get this. You want to know why? I know you're just like, wow, dude, you're talking about the devil a lot in church. I don't like this. This is scary. That's the point. Do you know what the early saints would do when they were departing from one another? I'm going to use Anthony as an example. You just need to dap me up. It's all good. Right? This is how we say bye to each other in the church. All right, bro, good worship service. Man, you were going after God. Love you, bro. See ya. Great. Okay, let me show you how spiritual fathers and mothers said bye to each other. Stay vigilant. stay vigilant. That's how they would say bye to each other. Stay vigilant. That's kind of gangster, you gotta admit. Like, that's pretty hard. Yo, what's up, bro? You staying vigilant? Like, when's the last time you saw your homeboy? Yo, you staying vigilant? What's up? You about it? You tripping up? Be honest. Don't you lie to me. Tell the truth right now. You staying? Oh, man. No, we have an enemy and he will play dirty. And the reason that I'm sussing this out, and I know I'm making a joke of it, but the reason I want to just really hammer this home is because the enemy will do this crazy thing where he doesn't play dirty. He doesn't play fair. He has no rule book. The enemy of your soul has no combat handbook or like rules of engagement. He will find every opportunity. And so here's why it's important for our conversation, because when you're faced with the stress of life, when you have a flood of negative emotions wash over you, when your friend betrays you, when you're feeling lonely, when you're anxious about money, when somebody told you something that wasn't true and was a lie about you, the enemy wants to push you into a maladaptive coping mechanism, so that you re-enslave yourself to the life Jesus died to set you free from. That's his strategy here. He wants to get you, because here's the thing, guys. If the enemy can't get you to stop following, everybody needs to hear, I know I was joking around with stuff, but this might be the most important thing I'm gonna say all night. If the enemy can't get you to stop following Jesus, he will get you to hate following Jesus. He'll get you to be bitter towards following Jesus. He'll get you to come to church with a grudge towards following Jesus. And he will suck the life and vitality out of you. Because what he'll do is he'll push you into a space where you respond to stress through maladaptive coping mechanisms, and then he'll plant a lie and he'll say, see, the cross didn't work. I told you it was fake. I told you it was sociological phenomena. You're like, wow, that's intense, Adam. Yeah, because I've lost friends to this. I had brothers in this thing. And they put up their discipleship to Jesus on the altar. And man, it's not their fault. They weren't taught. But that's how he works. I've seen it time and time again. And I look in this room and I'm so excited for what God is doing. But I have to be honest. I'm worried. Because if we don't know what we're going to face in life, we won't know how to live in the vitality of Jesus. Jesus said life and life abundantly. Do you want that? I want that too. I want that too. I want us to put this wheel up here called the maladaptive coping cycle. Wheel graph, whatever you want to call it. So this is how this works. You're in stasis, and then you have a stressor happen, and then your brain gets flooded with this cocktail of negative emotions, your flight or flight response. And then you have this maladaptive coping mechanism, and that could be anything for any of you, and you need to be honest about what this is in your own self. I can't read your mail. And then you have this flood of temporary relief, and then you experience profound amounts of guilt and shame and frustration because you know the thing that you did was not what you're supposed to do. This is how this works, and this then becomes a vicious cycle where we spiral further and further down and away from Jesus' vision of life and life to the full. That's how he gets us. In order to help explain this, I want to introduce us to a little concept called neuroplasticity. Can I do that? Say neuroplasticity. Let's go back to bio class. The National Institute of Health defines neuroplasticity this way. Neuroplasticity, also known as neuroplasticity or brain plasticity, is a process that involves adaptive, structural, and functional changes to the brain. It is defined as the ability of the nervous system to change its activity in response to intrinsic or extrinsic stimuli by reorganizing its structure, functions, or connections. What the heck does that mean? Dr. Susan Reich is helping us out right now. She summarizes it this way. Pathways in the brain are made, just this isn't up on the screen. I found it after I sent the slides in, so just listen. Pathways in the brain are made by connections between neurons or nerve cells. And when a behavior is performed, the connections between these cells change with the frequency of the behavior performed. These become neural pathways that act like grooves in the road maps of our brain. The more frequently we travel the road or do a behavior, the stronger and more second nature the behavior becomes. So what this means is your brain has been programmed through time and repetition to do things with near autonomy. To illustrate this, do any of you guys remember driving home last night? Any of you guys remember that? Okay, great. That's awesome. You guys have a really higher level of cognition than me. I pretty much never remember driving home because I've done it so many times. So my brain, to save energy, just goes into autopilot and I drive home. And I literally leave the church and get home without even really remembering what's on the road. That's neuroplasticity. Okay? However, you have to pay a lot more attention when you're taking a new way, right? Like if I drop you off in Airdrie and you've never been to Airdrie before, I don't know why. If I drop you off in Airdrie and I say, hey, make your way back home, you're gonna pay a lot more attention to your driving, to the roads, to the signs, all those things, right? Because you haven't done it before. So through time and repetition, a pathway is formed where actions become autonomous. A neural pathway has been formed. Now, here's an illustration of what I mean. I just want to show this. This is actually a neural, what is this? That's not from Stranger Things, I promise. This is a neural network in 3 stages. When it first formed after 2 weeks and after 2 months. And you can see there's quite a big difference. Look at that. First formed, 2 weeks, 2 months. Look at the difference. The connections, the synapses, the way that it's wired are so much more intricate. The reason we have to talk about, y'all are like, dude, this is good and well. Can we just talk about like being free and like following Jesus and like shame the devil and stuff? Listen, the reason we have to talk about this is because we all have neural pathways that have been built over the last decade. And guess what? You want to know when the most significant neural pathways you built in your life were? When you were a child. When you were a child. There's a guy named Bessel van der Kolk. In his book, The Body Keeps the Score, is a New York Times bestseller. In his book, he did a study in the 90s where he found that people, listen to this, everybody listen up. People would respond to things that reminded them of memories etched in their subconscious from nearly 20 years earlier, the same way as if it had just happened. Ow. The same way as if it had just happened. They would get people to imagine something happening that happened 20 years earlier, and their body would respond the same way as if it just happened right in front of them. Your body keeps the score. Neural pathways have been built. Your stress response and how you cope with it afterwards are very automatic. And so the reason that we often keep going back to destructive, sinful patterns, even though we know we shouldn't and sometimes don't want to, is because quite plainly, it's all your brain knows how to do when faced with stress. It's all your brain knows how to do. So when your coworker yells at you, or your friend betrays you, or the person you thought you were going to spend the rest of your life with leaves you, or your job crumbles, or the church hurt happens, or the fear and anxiety that's latent in you rises to the surface because of something someone said to you, your body goes back 20 years and says, this is how I'll deal with it. So the righteousness of God is in you, but your brain is still formed by the habits you made outside of your life with God. Try telling your friends that next time they confess to you or like tell you something wrong. Bro, they're like, oh dude, like I can't believe I did, like I'm just like so done. Listen, man, you got an unrighteous neural pathway, bro. You gotta burn that thing out. You're like, what the? See, what I'm trying to get at is that all of us have pre-programmed ways of responding to stress and negative emotions that were formed in the ignorance of our youngest years. It wasn't our fault. We didn't know any better. It's important to mention because some of us walk through those doors carrying the weight of the world on our shoulder. You feel beat down, depressed because no matter how hard you try for whatever reason, you keep opening up that app. You're frustrated with yourself because no matter how hard you try, no matter how hard you will yourself, no matter how much self-loathing you generate, you still can't seem to shake that porn habit. No matter how hard you try, you still want the attention of dudes you know are going to treat you poorly. No matter how hard you try to follow Jesus, you still overeat when faced with all this stress. No matter how hard you try, you still have just one too many drinks to take the edge off, even though you shouldn't. No matter how hard you try, you still can't suppress your sexual appetite. No matter how hard you try, you still find yourself spending way too much money on clothes because the rush of a purchase briefly counteracts all the insecurity in your belly. You're frustrated, annoyed, and disheartened because all those old habits just seem to kick around. And I just want to tell you that's because you've literally programmed your brain to respond to stress, anxiety, and fear in a certain way. Can we get the maladaptive cycle back up real quick? Some of us are in this spiral claiming fidelity to Jesus, but suffering under the weight of shame and condemnation because we just can't seem to shake our old habits. You feel beat down and depressed because you're living in this, and I just want you to know that there's freedom from it. You're like, man, you drew that out for a while. I had to. I'm sorry. There's freedom from it. Your brain has been wired to cope with stress in harmful and sinful ways because you didn't know any better. And you walked in here thinking that God was upset with you, pointing a finger at you and going, I wish you could just get it right. And I just want you to know that's not the disposition of God towards you right now. He's not looking at you going, how could you? I died on the cross for you, so why do you keep doing this thing? He's looking at you going, hey, let's go on the journey of rewiring this bad behavior together. And he didn't come in here accusing you of not being good enough. He came in here welcoming you to transformation and vitality. That's his disposition towards you. Because it's not your fault that the only way you knew how to deal with depression when you were young is to drink. It's not your fault. It's not your fault the only way you knew how to subdue anxiety was through weed. It's not your fault that the only way you knew how to fight off intense feelings of emptiness was through porn. It's not your fault that the only way you knew how to medicate your lack of self-worth is through finding affirmation in the false gaze of lustful men. It's not your fault that the only way you know how to cope with the intense self-doubt is by consistently asking people to affirm you. Some of us in here are under the yoke of slavery, and Jesus is going to take that yoke, break it, and put his on instead. Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Some of us in here are weary from that cycle. You want to know what Jesus says to weary people? Come to me, all you who are weary, and I'll give you rest. I just want all of us to know that there's grace from the Father. His desire right now is to embrace you and transform you. His love is so strong. He sees how hard you're trying, and he's proud of you. He's not mad at you. And next time you run back to that old habit that's been ingrained in your neural pathways since you were a child, I just want you to know that grace will be waiting for you there. Just like the father who waits to return, who waits on his porch for the return of his son, he's going to be waiting there for you with open arms saying, I'm so glad you're home. Let me dust all of this stuff off your shoulders, put a ring of royalty on your finger, bathe you, clothe you, feed you, and sit you down at a banquet table of delight. I'm so glad you're here. And I just want all of us to feel that, because it's not your fault the only way you knew how to cope with these things was through sin. It's not your fault. But it is your responsibility. The good news is that Jesus promises you life and life abundantly every step of the way. And while it is important to acknowledge that all of us in here have ingrained habits of how we cope with negative emotions and stress, it's also important to acknowledge that if the science of neuroplasticity is correct, that means your brain can change. God's a genius because he didn't architect your brain to stay bound in sinful pathways. He architected your brain to be able to function in a new way. And so while some of you in here are going, yeah, but the reason I slept with this person is because of what this happened to me and the negative emotions it felt. And some of you are saying, yeah, but the reason that I, use weed is because I keep feeling anxious. And the reason I open my laptop at 12 p.m. at night, even though I know I shouldn't, is because I keep struggling with loneliness. Listen, those emotions are valid, but your emotions don't justify your sin. There's accountability in how you were created. Do you understand that? Your brain can change. Jesus didn't call you to a life of transformation without making it possible spiritually and physically. Which means you're accountable to participate in him doing so. Richard Rohr famously says this: whatever pain is not transformed is transferred. Think about that. Whatever pain is not transformed is transferred. In other words, you can actually perpetuate sin cycles in the world that continue to harm yourself in creation. And it's your responsibility as a follower of Jesus to look at how you are responding to stress and negative emotions and go on the long, winding road of continual transformation, because you don't want to carry that on from one generation to the next. Whatever pain is not transformed is transferred. This means that there's grace for you when you choose wrong, but there's also grace for you to choose the right thing. Paul writes this in Romans 12. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Here we see the ancient wisdom of Scripture meet the modern breakthroughs of neuroscience. As I said, your brain is designed by God to change and develop and become mature and whole and integrated and healthy. So none of us in here have to stay in these cycles that are keeping us bound. Not a single person. The same way that your brain has created neural pathways that lead you to respond to the stress of life in sinful ways, so in partnership with the Holy Spirit, your brain can be trained to deal with the stress and traumatic-inducing events of life in righteous and godly ways. This means that every challenge you face, every setback you encounter, and every anxious moment you experience are all opportunities to form yourself into the image of Christ. Every challenge, every setback, every negative emotion, not 1 second is not an opportunity to have Christ formed in you. So let's end our time together by looking at how we can manage the stressors of our life in a godly way. This is where it gets happy, guys, so lighten up. Just kidding. Adaptive coping mechanisms. Let's define this. Adaptive coping mechanisms are ways of handling emotional instability and stress in a proactive and positive way. They are system-oriented, embedded in the lifestyle. So these are coping mechanisms that are generally considered to be healthy and effective ways of managing stress. They're characterized by a few things. If you can go to the next slide. Proactive and solution-focused, not avoidant. They're less dopaminergic in their response, which means they do release levels of dopamine for you to feel a pleasure response when you do them, but they're not going to flood your brain with this crazy dopamine cocktail that then crashes you later. It's very sustainable. They're habit and lifestyle-based, and they have incredible transformative power. Now, the interesting thing about adaptive coping mechanisms is their aim is not to disengage from the stress and pain of life, but actually to re-engage with it and transform it. So, and the band, y'all can come back up. We're going to land the plane here. I'm just going to give you some examples that clinical psychologists have put together of adaptive coping mechanism examples. It's interesting. Meditation, prayer, and spiritual practices are number 1. Exercising, journaling, verbal processing, planning, positive self-talk, gratitude practices, nature, and then rest and sleep. So basically, these are all ways that you can actually build rhythms into your life so that when stress happens, you can respond to it in a healthy way. So for example, if you have regular rhythms of meditation or prayer, or you have a spiritual practice like Tehillah, that has a markedly incredible increase in your ability to respond well to stress. So much of your ability to respond well to stress is actually the community you're a part of. It's fascinating. I could talk about that forever, but I don't have time. Exercise, journaling. What journaling does is it creates a narrative about your life. We are storied creatures. You need a story. You need a story. You need a story. You need a story. All of us in here need a story that we live out of. Even you. You need a story. All of us need a story to live out of. If we don't have a story, we'll have a hard time grounding ourselves in reality. So when, let's say traumatic events happen in life, if we don't know the story we're a part of, we won't have a way to find ourselves in it. We'll feel like a ship lost at sea. Planning, positive self-talk, gratitude practices, these are just ways of reorienting your mind. And then nature, connecting with the world, and then rest and sleep. Who doesn't love sleep? No, you don't want to raise your hand. You don't want to do that. You want to be, no, I love sleep. Keep my hand down. I raise my hand because I'm, whatever. Now, the same way that psychology will call harmful what the scriptures call sinful, so also will psychology call helpful and healthy what for thousands of years Christians have called holy. These are clinical examples. They're neutral examples. They don't have a religious undertone or a Christian telos. And this is why I want to pull on my boy, Dr. Gerald G. May, in his book, The Anatomy of the Soul. He says this: long before neuroscientists began advocating these approaches, he's talking about the things I just listed. Long before neuroscientists began advocating these approaches, believers engaged in spiritual practices that fostered the mind's development. Whether we call it an undivided heart or an integrated prefrontal cortex, these practices, which are usually called spiritual disciplines, when practiced faithfully but without burden, do the very things that we have been discussing to help integrate our brains. That is I think like a PhD, whatever, like super smart dude, basically saying, hey, if you just do the Jesus stuff, your ability to manage stress is gonna be a whole lot better. I said, if you just do the Jesus stuff, your ability to manage stress is going to be a whole lot better. It's going to be a whole lot better. It's going to be a whole lot easier. There's ancient wisdom. Everybody say this: the new thing is the old thing. Say it again: the new thing is the old thing. We have entire schools of psychology that are trying to find ways to cure anxiety. And Jesus is looking at the world and saying, anxiety can't exist in my presence. We have entire medications and pharmaceutical departments that are trying to do what the ancient Christians have done just by following Jesus. And I'm not trying to say, like, obviously don't take medication. Take medication, it's good. Okay, I'm not on that wave. But I am trying to say that for so many thousands of years, all the issues that we deal with, people had integrated under Jesus because of their lifestyle. And so there's so much ancient wisdom we can pull from. The old thing is the new thing. Richard Foster famously outlined 3 categories of spiritual disciplines to help us order our lives around Jesus: inward, outward, and communal. Inward refers to cultivating self-awareness and inner peace. Outward are things we do, serving others, Sabbath, solitude. Communal are things we do together: worship, getting guidance from a pastor or a trusted friend. And basically, when you study the spiritual formation literature, you end up with this list of practices that Christians have done for the last thousands of years, and it almost makes me emotional. Because all that you're looking at right here, you're not looking at like fun little activities. You're looking at what people did in response to the love of Jesus. Community, silence and solitude, listening prayer, meditating on the Psalms, declaring the word of the Lord over yourself. David says, say unto my soul. He's talking to himself. He's declaring what God said over him. Praying through yearly objectives. God, what do you want me to focus on this year? How can I partner with you? connecting with creation, going out and experiencing the wonder and the beauty of the world God created. Sabbath rest, participating in the breath of God through Sabbath. Evangelism and serving others, going out, reaching the lost. It's crazy. Do you know what the number one factor in happiness was in a study done on happiness? Sacrificial living. The people who sacrificed the most were the most happy. That's the Jesus way. Coming through modern psychology and statistics. And all these psychologists and neuroscientists are like, oh wow, that's really crazy. And Jesus is up there like, yeah, I did that. And then lament. Man, we don't know how to lament anymore. Whew. The fact that we blow up when sad things happen, my goodness, the Bible's full of lament. You ever read David? People think he's bipolar. You know that? Oh, I'm serious. Y'all laugh. Straight up. There are biblical scholars that are fully convinced that David was bipolar. I'm dead serious. Because of how, like my soul is in the pits of despair and I am crushed to ash. You could have just said you're sad. We don't know how to lament. So what you're looking at here, you're not looking at like, oh man, that's really cool. My pastors pray and they get together in church and all that stuff. No, you're looking at sources of life. You're looking at things you can do to enjoy Jesus. Do you remember his vision that we started out with? What was it? Let's get 5 more people saying it because I heard like a whisper over there. What was the vision? Life and life abundantly. Life and life abundantly. That's his vision for you. That's his vision for you. And so when you look at this, I just want us to see this and go, man, the life Jesus invites me into is way more accessible than I think. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. He's not calling you to a life of dead religious observance. It'll only feel like that if you let the enemy push you there. He's calling you to a life of adventure and hope and freedom and purpose and passion and participating in his mission on the earth and seeing the dead raised and the leper cleansed and the hopeless set free and the bound healed and the slaves bursting forth onto the creative scene. That's the life he's inviting you into. Jesus is the hero. Every single church you go into, Jesus is up on the wall in an eternal image with his arms like this. He's open to all of us. He's never closed off. We remember him with his arms spread open because that's his posture towards every human. Always available, always there, always invitational. He lived the life we couldn't live, made the sacrifice we couldn't, so that we would then live the life that he lived while on the earth. And that's what we're dealing with here. Jesus saw the cycle you and I were in. He saw the danger of coping in ungodly ways. And he went to the cross and endured it so that you and I might know what it's like to no longer suffer under the tyranny of oppressive sin cycles. So I just want to end with this slide for ministry time. Oh yeah, we don't have time to go into that. I'm going to end with this slide. So we're just going to go into a time of prayer. This is how we're going to end. And I just want to invite everybody in here. You don't need to sit. You don't need to stand. Sorry, you don't need to stand. You don't need to do anything. Stay sitting. And I just want you to read these questions. What are the stressors in my life and the negative emotions I face? What are the unhealthy, sinful ways that I cope? And what are healthy, godly habits I can use to cope? And what we're going to do is I'm just going to pray and invite the Lord to speak to us. And I want us to all just take a second and hear him. And we're going to stay here and it's going to be quiet for maybe an uncomfortable period of time. But the goal of this is that you would hear God and respond. Because like I said, the invitation is life and life more abundantly. So let's get really honest about what would sabotage us from that. So Jesus, we want to welcome you in here in this room to just talk to us and coach us. Jesus, you are the great coach. You're the great mentor. You're the great rabbi. And you're so gentle in your correction. You're so humble. You're so kind. You're not mad at us in this room. You're proud of us, and you want more than any of us in here to transform our heart and our soul and our mind. So Lord, as we just ask ourselves these questions, we just pray that you would free us from the tyranny of oppressive cycles and liberate us into the ones of life. So Tehillah, let's just take 2-3 minutes. Feel free to write these on your phone, write them down, do whatever you have to do. And ask yourselves these questions.